How could we make sense of the financial industry right now? From crypto's trust crisis to the FTX trial, Silicon Valley's banks collapse earlier this year, and the movie in theaters Dumb Money, there's enough going on to make our brains explode. So today we have a very special guest, Kirin Kalia. She has 25 years more than that, of storytelling and leadership experience across tech and business, journalism, immigration policy, and B2B marketing. She founded Grow Through Story in 2021 to help startup founders and visionary leaders share compelling stories that deliver business results. Kirin has coached 1,000 plus startup founders. How do you even count that? To pitch angels, VCs, and companies, including Visa, P&G Ventures, the Estée Lauder Companies, and more. I cannot wait for this conversation. But first, welcome to this week's episode of Make Sense, a video podcast that simplifies complex issues at the intersection of tech and people. There are many. So whether you're totally hyped on AI and ready for the robot takeover, or you want to crawl into a cave after deleting all of your social media accounts, I'm here with my guest to help make sense of what's going on so you can design yourself into the future. My name is Lindsay. I'm a product market fit strategist, innovation consultant, and venture fundraising advisor. If you're new here, subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. So let's make sense of the disruption that the financial industry needs. Kirin, how are you?
Great. Thanks for that intro, Lindsay. That's awesome. It's all, woo, let's get into it.
I love it. So let's start with our first segment, Crystal Ball. What does the future hold? This is where I call out interesting predictions for this year, and my guests tell us their hot take. So I'm going to fire off some headlines, and Kirin, I want you to say either yes, I want that to happen, or no, please no. And if you know something, like give us the deets, okay?
Okay.
All
Fair
right.
enough.
So, first prediction that was made at the end of last year for 2023, fintech's rapid regeneration. So, fintech startups are facing the rockiest market conditions, but many are adapting by expanding into new spaces and catering to enterprises. What's this about?
All right. So, what I've noticed over many years of working closely with fintechs, Visa's had this competition called the Visa Everywhere Initiative since 2015. They took it global. It's had various winners over the years, and I see how things are developing in different countries as well. And I think that the consumer side is usually what people talk about because that's what affects them and they see that first. But the B2B side is really interesting. Money is always moving and it doesn't move very efficiently and it still costs a lot of money. And you're kind of like, really? Like it takes a couple of days for that to happen? Like what world are we living in? Like, shouldn't that be better by now? Right. So, I think that just the general focus we've seen over the last, say, like year-ish, hey, startups, you should be focused on making money. You shouldn't be burning. Like, let's be more serious about
All
building
the
businesses,
normal.
right?
Yeah.
That absolutely applies to fintechs, and the space that they're in has gotten sort of knocked down, but I think is like that's what the numbers showing. It's stabilizing and there's so much more work still to be done, so I'm absolutely excited to see where everything goes. And I think some of the stuff just isn't going to be very sexy, but it's going to start to affect our daily lives, right? And I think that's what's interesting to me.
So I think one part I thought you were going to take issue with is like the word rapid
Rapid.
regeneration, because
Mm,
media headlines always like to say things like that, but
yeah.
then we know that I know some of the biggest financial institutions are sitting on top of cobalt platforms built in the 70s in the
Yeah.
Philippines, right? So rapid and fintech.
And regulatory, yeah, those are not things that all go together, of course not.
So it is that prediction is sensational in
Yeah,
a way because rapid just doesn't really go
doesn't
with
exist.
fintech. But you did share with me that at least on the investment side, the funding for financial technology startups has decreased like all startup funding, but
Right.
stabilized. Seems
Stabilizing. Yep.
stabilizing
Yep.
right now.
Yep. That's the latest CB Insights thing that just came out. Money 2020 is happening in Vegas this week, so there's a lot of people putting out their press releases, and I think there's probably still some trauma from earlier this year with Silicon Valley Bank collapse and all that, and we've had banks on the consumer side laying people off, and so there's still a lot of uncertainty related to greater economic stuff and inflation and all that, right? But I'd say that there's definitely that window opening again, like let's get excited, let's build stuff. And I am a big fan going back to all my years of being in this world and .com crazy and everything, like let the tourists leave, let the people who thought it was cool leave, let the people who want to build and do the real work and make stuff happen, let them flourish, please. So yes.
One part of this headline that came to mind while I was getting ready for our conversation was the part where it says that, B2C, direct to customer, fintech, that's what we all know about. But that startups that are doing the real work, like you just said, are probably really focused on catering to enterprises, and that's
Mhm.
that's where the work, the real
Yeah.
work gets done.
Yeah.
And I couldn't help but think about the movie in theaters right now, Dumb Money, which is based on the true story of regular people that put money into
Yep.
GameStop, drove a movement, and
Yep.
took on billionaires. And in that saga of January 2021, Robinhood, which is we think of as a B2C app-based brokerage service, stopped everyday stock market investors from purchasing the security. People screamed to foul. But Robinhood is also a B2B company too. And I'm just thinking that, man, they kind of messed up as well in the public eye with that situation. I wonder if that conversation is worth bringing back, with this movie. Have you seen it?
I have not seen the movie. I have seen trailers,
Yeah,
and I'm not surprised that this is a very appealing story to tell on a big
100%.
screen, right? Because it definitely appeals to the common man, like the underdog, right? Triumphing over the
Right.
the, the big bad billionaires who just think they can
Yeah.
screw everyone all the time, right? We've seen various versions of that story in different ways over the years, and so it's very appealing. There is some truth to it that people can move markets. There's incredible power to people when they come together. It's inspiring at a time when people have been very fractured and don't seem to like come together very well on various things. The world's
Right.
messed up in lots of ways. So I think that's an interesting part of it. But yeah, there's what people sometimes what startup people don't like to do is deal with regulations. And anytime you're in financial services, you are absolutely in regulatory stuff. Like there's lots
Yeah.
of rules around what you can and can't do with money
Right.
for a reason that go back, to things that have happened in our history and bank runs in the past. Still didn't stop a bank run from happening because people are involved and people do stupid stuff and
Yeah.
brains, psychology. Anyway, it's all part of it. But I think it's an interesting moment to see what's starting to happen with more people maybe starting to feel empowered around their money and not feel stupid and not feel like the banks or everybody else has that sort of power over them. The tools and stuff are getting better, but this idea that you can own your data still doesn't exist, and that's what's. I heard a podcast interview with somebody else saying, my grandchildren are going to grow up in a world where the fact that you don't own your data seems really old fashioned to them, right? That could be the world that you're eventually getting into. And financial data, of course, is a big part of that. It's all kinds of data. We are still very far from that. Uh, there's not a lot of trust out there, unfortunately. So I don't know how it's all going to happen, and if that is actually the way the world's going to work. And maybe this isn't the answer you were expecting, but like, I'm hopeful that look, I come from a journalism background, hold absolutely truth, hold power accountable. Sunlight is a good thing. And let's, see how stuff really works and empower people, because I think ultimately we can do more good with the data and everything.
And that
And
is what Make Sense is all about. So if I could say one thing about the data piece, I will say simply that we think our banks know a lot about us, but I'd like to distinguish between know and just have information.
yeah,
So a lot of financial institutions have a lot of our information, Whether they know, process, analyze, and can act on it is a different
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
So if you're like creeped out about what banks can do or might be able to do, uh, trust that these enterprise systems in the Philippines built on cobalt are keeping them from really,
Well, and it's not just the US, it's all over the world. And I've seen various startups that are trying to fix what's broken, right? And connect the layers that aren't connected and to make it easier for people to move money, make it cheaper, faster, like all that sort of stuff. And the stakes, of course, are really high for incumbents. And I know this from being a political science major as an undergrad. Like anybody who has power does not want to give it up, right? There is a very strong incentive to keep that for themselves and to continue to keep those legacy systems, even if they're not good for people. So
Right.
it's going to be an
Yeah,
interesting
we'll
time.
see. Yeah, so probably not rapid, but regenerating.
Regenerate.
Okay, next headline.
Yeah.
Prediction. Credit scoring will become more accurate. So we want and need more effective methods to analyze credit profiles, score the traditionally unbanked and underserved, like
Yep.
new immigrants,
Yep.
prevent fraud.
Absolutely.
Do you know anything?
Do I know anything? I've seen a couple of startups in this space. Go figure, Visa is interested in things like this. They love to bring solutions to their customers who include banks, right? People tend to think of Visa only as the thing that they use to pay with, but there's a lot of people on the back end of that world who are, making sure that it actually is possible for you to pay. The merchants have to
Right.
accept it. The banks have to issue the cards. So the most interesting thing to me is that this data that you can make decisions on is only possible because everyone carries a smartphone, or most people in the world now carry a smartphone. So one example I saw in Latin America last year, 2 years ago, was being able to take data around like how often you top up your mobile data minutes or talk time, how often you use Uber Eats and actually pay for it, and then being able to, for instance, in Honduras, decide if you are worthy of a motorcycle loan. Like that, to me, that is such a great
Really
example.
interesting. So I was thinking if anyone listening has watched American football, you have seen all of the commercials with uh, Travis Kelsey, who's a Kansas City Chiefs football player, for Experian.
Yeah,
Experian launched Experience Boost and Experience Smart Money debit card to help people build credit without credit cards. So that's a very
yeah,
tangible way or thing that we can
right,
point to and say
right.
credit scoring can become more democratized, accessible, and more accurate.
Right, right. And I think that look, like I come from an immigrant background. I have immigrant family anyway, and I know how hard it is to come into this country without a credit history, like
Right.
try and do anything, right? And it was an American born cousin of mine who spent most of his career living in Europe, and when he came back to the US he was so pissed off. He's like, I can't get a loan for a mortgage. What is going on? Right? Like I have all this credit history in Germany, but they don't care, they don't trust it, they don't believe anyway. So like again, it sort of speaks to that data and being able to carry it with you, and like who am I, what do I want you to see and to know about me so that you can believe that I am a trustworthy, you can take that risk, right? And I can, the money can move more freely. And so yes, so now I can have this money so I can go do these other things that ultimately benefit my family, my local community, the economy, etc. Right? Like absolutely a fan of
100%.
all that sort of stuff. Now, of course, there's going to be people who own that data who are going to be kind of like wanting to keep it, and there's going to be the ones who like Experian who don't want to get disrupted, and so that's why they're trying to get out ahead of the curve. I
Right.
totally get
Yeah.
it, right? And still,
Right.
there's room for a startup somewhere to come in and be like, "We're going to do this," and then maybe Experian will buy them. We'll see.
Right. Yep. Exactly. That's how that
Yep.
world works. So, next prediction. Despite crypto's trust crisis, leaders will push for widespread adoption by enhancing security, reliability, and user experience.
Hmm. I think there's very strong incentives to make it a safer place, not just the Wild West. And it's not the first time we see that. Very, very often, regulation is way behind technology and user trends and all those sorts of things. And then it's like, whoa, go. And it's not until somebody gets hurt, people lose a lot of money, that you go back and you're like, okay, how are we going to go fix this?
Right.
And we have a bunch of really old people, and I say this with great respect, probably have a lot of wisdom, don't know jack about this stuff, and are absolutely clueless at making any kind of probably well-informed policy. I don't know what the solution is to that, but I think some kind of regulation will help things move along so that it becomes a legitimate way to pay and a legitimate way for people to invest and make money, and not to worry if their account is going to disappear. It's
So
stolen.
if you were sitting next to a congressperson that's on the finance commission, works with the SEC, and you had to give them one sentence on what crypto is,
One
can you
set.
take on this challenge?
Oh, I am a big fan of putting things in plain English and as few words as possible. Um, and
Crypto is digital cash.
yeah, and it can take different forms, right? And it doesn't have to be backed by a government. It can be something that somebody creates, and that has value because people believe it has value, or it has some other way to back it up.
Right.
Right? We've seen people come out with their own coins and like all this sort of crazy, and like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of buyer beware kind of stuff that probably should be out there before you jump on the latest hype or whatever. Just like you shouldn't believe every celebrity who says this is the greatest way to lose weight or to clear up your skin or anything like that.
So, breaking down this prediction, I like to say, okay, leaders will push for widespread adoption. Okay, sure, right? Leaders will push for it. If we're gonna say yay or nay, leaders will push for it. Sure,
Sure.
yes, they will focus on security, reliability, and user experience. Cool. What do you think about the timeline for something like widespread adoption? Because
Ooh.
that's what the claim is. We'll push
Mm,
for widespread adoption. I think we can all say clearly that's not happening in 2023,
it did
right?
not. No.
Whoever made this prediction for 2023 was, selling snake oil.
Right.
So is there a timeline in the far off future? Can
I
crypto replace cash?
It's going to be tough. I think digital payments replace cash, absolutely, and that is a world that I've seen make
And we're
great.
already living in,
Right, right. You
whether
can.
digitally paying with our traditional bank accounts by putting our phones on the metro
Yep,
turnstile to pay
yep,
for our fare.
yep.
We're doing that.
Right. So there's lots of ways that money is moving without it actually being cash. And there's a lot of advantages to that. And there's a lot of people who are being left behind.
Hmm.
I live in Los Angeles, and I don't remember the details, but the city basically doesn't want essentially cashless businesses to really exist because you're going to eliminate certain people from
The
being able to use.
unbanked, right? There
Right.
are people that do not have bank accounts, cannot have credit cards,
Carry
right?
cash.
And that's not a choice,
Yeah.
right? So, uh, um, yeah,
Right.
having a cashless business does exclude the unbanked, which tend to be underrepresented,
Right.
underserved,
Right. Right. So
not to-
I I think we're quite a ways off when you look at other sort of movements of things. So this is very funny. Right before all the crypto like markets tanked last year, it was like literally like a few weeks before, I reconnected with an old sort of colleague person I've known for many years who had reinvented himself as a crypto expert as well as investor, doing very well in that world. And this was like March 2022. And the analogy he gave me was that like crypto, it's like the early days of the internet, right? Like we're still like in the days of like browser wars or whatever, or like, like we're a long way from any kind of mainstream adoption and from anyone like really sort of taking this as a daily part of their lives. And it's going to take a while, just like the internet took a while. Now we have seen timelines shorten with newer technology adoptions, right? It doesn't take as long as it used to, but I absolutely see that parallel. Like I remember when the dot-com boom went bust and everybody was
Mhm.
having pink slip parties. If you don't know what a pink slip is, that's the thing that you used to get when you were basically laid off from a job, right? And like, oh, the internet is a fad, it's not coming back. No, it had a big correction, right? Because there was crazy, like I read the S1s as a young tech business reporter. I was like, these companies should not be going public. Why does nobody see
No, no,
that, right?
no.
Like, so there's all sorts of crazy going on. And so, yes, of course, like a bunch of stuff happened. And then we eventually came back out of it, right? And so I'd like to think that crypto would be on that same thing. If you didn't buy into the first thing, you didn't get, burned, good for you, but I don't think you should totally write it off.
Okay, cool. I love that. And that brings us to our second segment. What do you know? This is where us relatively intelligent tech ecosystem insiders discuss what hot mess has made national news. We don't claim to be experts, but we may know more than you do. Kiran, for those of us that have just seen headlines about FTX trial, can you catch us up on the basics? What is this saga about? What happened? Who is
Yeah.
Sam something something guy?
Sam Bankman-Fried,
Freed.
another in a long line of illustrious, charismatic founders who thought that they could do things that were not really possible in the real world, who kind
Yeah.
of, reality eventually catches up with you. You're not, untouchable in those sort of ways. Icarus flew too close to the sun, kind of like, yep. We've seen those stories play out before, but this one is really big because the amount of money involved, we're literally talking billions of dollars, literally probably stealing from your customers to make some very risky investments, and then also, have your own lifestyle bankrolled and things like that. So, when your inner circle kind of agrees to take government, deals to testify against you, which is what's happened to Sam Bankman-Fried. A lot of people, including a woman who was his former girlfriend, Caroline Ellison, seems to be the most sort of powerful in this group of people who've testified against him in the last couple of weeks. Stories are very consistent. Like, it doesn't look good for you, right? So
Mhm.
the defense
Take
tends
us,
to,
like, let's take
yeah,
it back a little.
yeah,
FTX, what is an exchange or was an
right,
exchange platform for trading
crypto.
different forms of
Right.
cryptocurrency?
And the idea was to be a safe place for it, right? Like, you're not going to get screwed. This is not the Wild West or whatever. Like,
And so normal people were coming to buy
yes.
crypto or
And
sell crypto.
they had all kinds of celebrity endorsements, Super Bowl ads, right? That kind of, splash is something you generally only do when you have the money to do it. So there must be something there for them to be doing it, right? Like,
Mhm.
you don't, like, look, I remember the .com days and pets.com and whatever, like doing there was a big Super Bowl rush then too, right?
With
So it doesn't,
companies that should not really IPO and
right,
they're vaporware in a
right,
way.
right. And
They-
so human memory can be kind of short, but so we see this, we're like, oh, this must be real if all these famous people are coming in and saying it's okay and real. And somebody who's very charismatic can be really, really persuasive at convincing people to sort of put their, you know, doubts or sort of like questioning, like, is this all, on the up and up? Is this, wait, isn't this really a house of cards? Like, look, like we all looked at the WeWork business model and we were like, this does not seem smart. This could totally fall apart. Right?
And
Like,
so FTX, did we have a bunch of, we had, you know, consumers that were, attracted to
sure.
his charisma and bought into the celebrities.
Investors. Yep.
We had investors who had a fear of missing out and
Yep.
poured money
Yeah.
in kind of the same way they did to WeWork with Adam Newman. What was the trigger that made it pop? Do you know? If you don't know, it's okay.
There
That's
were there were all sorts of like things happening in the larger market, right? We started to see some downturn, and more people wanted to take their money out, and then they couldn't. They couldn't get
they
their money out
couldn't because they didn't have the money to, and
to give
that's
it.
what happened to Robinhood during the GameStop issue, is that they didn't have enough cash to trade to execute all of the trades
Right.
that were being made on their platform.
Right.
Okay, so FTX, a sad tale of hubris, I think
Yeah.
is what you said. Yeah, on past episodes, the age of the tech startup hero comes to an end. FTX maybe is part of bringing it to an end. Maybe. I think we all like superheroes. So FTX you know, gets in a lot of trouble,
Yep.
doesn't have the cash balances to stay in operations. Do you know like who lost? Was it the Main Street investor, the average person that had money
Yeah.
in crypto with FTX?
A lot of people lost money, right? And then there's the ones who they had agreed to put money into. There were some nonprofits, for example, that had these big promises. You can imagine, like, somebody makes you $1 million gift or multi-million-dollar gift. That is absolutely game changing for a smaller nonprofit organization. That money
Or
disappears, you're like totally screwed, right?
yeah,
Like, so those kind of people, and then you had a lot of people who were sort of uh, around that group who probably, saw their credibility disintegrate at some level,
right.
right? Including
Right.
his own parents, or these
Yeah.
like lauded Stanford professors and stuff, and like they're doing everything they can to try and save their son. Good luck.
And then I know you love analyzing like who's in the position of power.
Yeah.
Is there anyone that won in this situation? Is there anyone that is walking away, that will walk away from this as a winner?
All the people who thought crypto was a bunch of BS,
Those
um,
people win.
get to gloat, who said, see, I told you you couldn't trust these people. They're all full of it. There's nothing really here. It's just a bunch of hype. Like, those kind of folks get some boost from it. I think this idea, like you said earlier, about the sort of end of the like sort of tech startup founder hero, um, anybody who doesn't want to sort of glorify technology or its ability to save humanity and sort of all that sort of stuff, like, also gets to say, look, like, here's another example. I think it's look, like, I don't think that every founder is going to be like the folks who we can all name, like,
Yeah,
unfortunately, who get, movies made about them, or documentary series, or, some version of their tale told to a larger audience that doesn't really know the tech industry. There's a lot of people doing really good work who are never going to maybe make those kind of headlines, and are going to continue to do hard stuff and solve real problems, and absolutely should be celebrated, and don't fit the like media models. I believe me, I know what those are, right? Like, we love
right.
those like overnight successes, which don't really exist. Anyway,
Yeah,
but I think for this particular moment, it's a lot of the naysayers who get to win. I think that the silver lining is that we can get more sober and actually start to say, okay, what do we want this world to look like? Because there is something here, and how do we make it so that it becomes a trusted part of our economy and opens banking and finance to more people who might not have had it before. Look, because that's part of it too. Like, if you live in a country, like, we think we've got inflation problems, talk to Argentina or like
I know.
Venezuela or whatever. Like, you do not want to get paid in your local currency because your money is worth nothing, right? So you can get paid in crypto and keep that up until the moment that you need it and convert it to your local currency to go pay your bills. That's a really powerful thing. There's a lot of people who can actually benefit from having this stuff, and it just needs to be trustworthy.
Right. I think in a simpler way, and tell me if I'm wrong, my cousin lives in Florence. She has a bank account with euros and a bank account with US dollars.
Yep.
So when the exchange rate is really favorable for US dollars, she'll convert her euros to USD. So that's essentially what
Yeah.
you're saying with
Yeah.
crypto is that maybe someone that doesn't have dual passports and bank accounts in multiple currencies, they can, they have crypto and they
Right.
can convert it when it makes sense, when terms are
Right.
favorable to.
Right. Right.
Exactly.
And there's people who want to get paid in that way. There's people who want to buy in that way. And it's still really hard to do that at scale, right?
Right.
And it's still too hard, and the on-ramps don't exist. There's people who are trying to solve the sort of fiat to crypto conversions and stuff like that. By the way, anytime there's a middleman, somebody's going to make money on that. So absolutely, somebody will figure that out, and it'll become commoditized and prices will drop. But um, I think there's still so much good that can come out of it. It would be a shame if we lost that because there were a bunch of bad actors and it was the early days. Just like the internet came back, right? Like, the bad
Right.
actors
Yeah.
got sort of cleared
No,
out.
what I find interesting about the false storyline of the tech startup CEO hero, particularly ones like Sam Bankman-Fried that we glorify and then fail us. Uh, like you said, there are a lot of people doing great work that don't fit the mold. And at the same time, uh, I think it's interesting to get to know the people behind the technology so that, like, the listeners, to make sense,
Yeah.
everyday
Yeah.
people can make better choices about what they choose to engage with and
Right.
which technologies, right?
Right.
So this kind of does, for people standing on the sidelines, make them a little more scared to engage
Probably.
uh, with crypto, but that's also part of the natural user adoption
Yep.
curve.
Yep.
So,
Exactly. Like it'll take a while. That was the
so, so this guy, I hear you framing him as a very charismatic person, but then someone else said he was a genius with no empathy. He didn't know what he was doing. Like, uh, what did he know what he's doing? Is it coming out that he absolutely did know what he was doing?
Look, I am not a jury, and I
Yeah,
I'm someone who wants for the evidence to come out. It doesn't look good. Um, and there's so much pattern matching that happens in technology, right? You know this really, really well.
yeah,
And so like there's a certain amount of pattern matching that sort of will also overlook character flaws in certain types of people. A woman, if he were a person of color, if he had something else, he probably wouldn't have gotten this far, because other flags would go off because he's not pattern matching in some way. But a younger white man who comes from privilege, who talks a really great game, that's like you can start to overlook some of those flags or whatever, or you're like, look, we've seen personalities like this before. They have to be sort of willing to break some rules and whatever in order to change things. And we're gonna, like, very much typical startup founder, we're gonna ask for forgiveness, not permission, right? Like, look, like, you incorporate in the Bahamas, great. You don't have financial regulatory concerns in the way that an American company would, even though technically maybe people thought you were American, but really you
yeah,
weren't. How does that work, right? So like, but this was the whole thing. Like, when this all this starts to come to light, now we're like, oh, look how bad, look how whatever. Like, but there are people who could have asked questions along the way and probably didn't, and so I'm a big believer in asking questions and asking them often, and asking yourself as a consumer of media, of any kind of product, like, what do I know here? What don't I know here? What information is being shared or not shared? Like, who has an interest in this? Like,
yeah.
ugh. So yeah, I'd say it doesn't look good for him, but I see a pattern that it matches in my experience of the person who thinks they can, like,
100%.
be God and nothing's going to bring them down. You've seen it with politicians, you've seen it with people in business, you see it in all kinds of spaces, and something at some point will bring them down. It's
Yeah.
not forever.
Mm. So now what the FTX trial has led us to is new interest in regulating crypto.
Yeah.
And you have a policy background. What type of regulation, like how, like
Yeah.
where would US government or, the EU or any other country, right? Where does regulation fit in? Is it about pinning a proper exchange rate for crypto? The FDIC is obviously not involved in crypto, so your money's not
Yeah.
insured.
Yeah, so I'm not a financial and, sort of regulatory policy expert. I think
Sure.
anything that brings more trust, that's going to bring more visibility, like, right, like, we saw this happen about a decade ago with this sort of unraveling of the old-fashioned rules for people who could invest in startups, right? And it's like
Oh, right,
there
right,
was
right.
this sort of
So the
classic example.
background real quick is
Yeah,
that, you had to be an accredited investor up until what? It was like 2013,
yeah,
14 when this
thereabouts.
changed,
Yeah,
right? Certain amount of assets, and then I don't know, I can't remember what the regulation or new rules were, but it allowed for like crowdfunding and
right, right,
changed who could, allowed more people
right.
with probably lower personal asset profiles to
Yes, to
invest in stuff.
invest. Right. So, hey, here's a whole asset class that's never been open to you because, in theory, we were protecting you from yourself because consumers don't always do their homework. We don't want, I think it was like basically the dentist in like name your, big city who probably has a really good practice to get burned because he doesn't really understand technology, but like wanted to, like
Right.
somebody like came across, his, like he had this person in the chair and like convinced him to, invest, you know, $100,000 of what would have been his retirement money into some crazy
Right.
startup that
It was
has
just
no chance.
really keeping people from investing in a very, very high risk
Right,
financial
right,
product.
right.
Right.
So we have regulations so that things can happen, but within some limits. So, we need that or the systems wouldn't work, right? Like we saw that even with SVB. Like if you have multi-million dollar accounts, the FDIC is only going to cover so much, right? So guess what? You probably want to have some of that money spread out just in
Right.
case because you don't want it to all disappear if something happens, right? We all
Right.
take some comfort because that actually covers most people. Like, look, we don't have
Right.
to worry about if we can get our money or not. So something that gives some more trust, some more visibility into how these things work or where your money actually is. Can you get it back, right? Does it need to be registered in certain ways or things like that? I think those are all going to be aspects of what we need to see happen so that people feel more comfortable. And then what starts to become more interesting is it's not just an asset that you invest in and trade or whatever. It also becomes something that people use in their daily lives. So as an alternative to fiat currencies. And I think we're still a little ways off from that. I think the trust is come first in more in the actual way that we can invest in it and not make it like crapshoot whether your money's going to be there or not, like or stolen
Right.
so easily or whatever. Like, that is absolutely a bad experience. Like nobody wants that, right?
So, would the advice be right now, uh, for someone that's been standing on the sidelines who hasn't purchased crypto in
I'm
any
there.
way?
I'm one of those people. Absolutely.
I would actually say I admit that I am one of those people too. The reason I did not invest in crypto, even though I had friends telling me about it 7, 8 years ago,
Yeah.
was because my financial risk in my asset portfolio is in my business as an
Yeah.
entrepreneur. And so I did not want to introduce even more risk into my portfolio. And I was knowing the history of technology and watching it
Yeah.
proliferate over my lifetime, particularly over the 2 decades I've been in my career,
Yeah.
I knew that it was going to have these,
Of course.
expanding contraction stumbling points. So is the advice right now why, you don't have to figure out your digital wallet and crypto. Like you can wait a little bit to see how this all
It
plays out still.
It absolutely depends on your risk profile, to your point, right? And if you can use it like you would take your money to Vegas, right? This is like the money that I am absolutely okay with losing. Like, right? And it
Right.
might be a small amount, and that's the good thing is that you don't have to put a ton of money into it to start to play with it and understand it, right? And I am absolutely the person who probably should do that. Look, I heard about Bitcoin in 2011 when like one of the first things that you could buy with it, no joke, were like llama wool socks. Like, like there were so few things you could do with the money, and it was like, and if I had bought a Bitcoin then and I knew where I kept it, because that's the other problem is like if you lost it, like good luck getting it back. People have tried. Like these are very sad stories. I've heard them, right? It would have been amazing, right? And I could have probably bought a house in LA for that amount of money that would like bought for a couple of Bitcoins in 2011.
I do, yeah. I do know someone that paid off their student loans because they bought Bitcoin probably in 2015 and then sold in 18 or 19, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, and
it,
timing markets, right? Like really tough.
it has that
Um,
opportunity,
Right.
but
So yeah. So like your risk profile part of it, treat it like some like Vegas kind of money. Like if that's something that interests you, I think that the market has corrected and maybe does start to come. Like everything goes in cycles. Nothing goes up forever. Nothing stays down forever. Like right.
exactly.
So take a long term view.
I do have, and really, again, I want to emphasize, like, we aren't experts, but we know more, maybe a little more than you do. I have a cousin who is very into crypto, and right now the value of crypto is quite reduced,
Yeah,
and there is an opportunity that maybe over the next 2 to 5 years, that number might 4x or 6x, right? Because there's a lot of space for it to grow
sure.
back.
Right.
But like here, so if you have money in your PayPal account and you just want to buy some Ethereum with your PayPal account, like Kirin said, it's like putting it in a slot machine. You might get some money back, right? I put some money into what was the big Powerball in California when I was there, right? $20, right? I think we made four,
Cool.
so
You were okay with that.
yeah, right. It was fun to think about
Yeah.
what we would do with the money if we
Yeah. Of
won, and that
course.
was the
What do you think?
activity in and of itself,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Exactly.
So, Kieran, I knew this was going to happen where I had an outline of topics that I wanted to talk to you about, and then we were going to talk, 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 and have such a fun time doing it, and we wouldn't get to everything. So, I want to end our session with a quick segment.
Okay.
Tell me something I don't know.
Okay.
Really,
Something you don't know.
really. Tell me something I don't know.
This is the funny one. Kind of keeping on the fintech and like banking and like,
Yeah, and you brought it up, but
right. I brought it
you
up, which is
said Silicon
Silicon
Valley
Valley
Bank
Bank
is not really dead.
dead. They're still around. Like we all thought like March 2023, like
SVB's gone, and
gone, like somebody acquired the assets, right? Like HSBC acquired the UK banking part, right? For like almost no money, right? And they're rebranding it and absorbing it. So you kind of figure that's what's happening, right? This little bank out of probably not that little, First Citizens Bank out of North Carolina buys what's left of Silicon Valley Bank, but has kept the brand. And there are still people who say they work for Silicon Valley Bank. Silicon Valley Bank came out with a press release for Money 2020 to say, hey, we're still here. We're still around. We're still like offering services, right? People have been opening accounts with us. Like it's still a thing. And it's kind of like, and they're doing a big marketing push. They're hosting events in San Francisco again. Like, so it's interesting that First Citizens as a bank decided to keep that brand because it has so many problems with it. And they're trying to, so we'll see. I think it's probably still too early to tell if it's going to be a thing. If it probably won't maybe have the kind of audience or trust that it had. But it's still around if you want to explore that. And they have, you know, probably still some what I heard from, somebody at an event, sort of clearly off the record, was that, from an integration point of view, they're very different cultures, as you can imagine, like a regional bank from the South and like this Silicon Valley, like very tech driven place. What I would hope is that all that sort of stuff aside, you have the ability for founders to still get easier access to financing, right? Because the big players still make it really hard. And I know this from talking to a founder who tried to open a JP Morgan account in those weeks right after, and she was like, what the hell? Like
yeah,
my business address is the same as my home address, so they wouldn't let my account go through, right? Like right, because she
hey,
didn't have like a business
proper
address. So like, there
business.
was a problem. And she was like, I'm a founder. Like, this is not that weird that this is my situation. And so why is this a problem and I can't have an account? Right. And maybe that has changed, but I just want to put that out there as an example of things. And I think that, you know, this idea that there's going to be more risk tolerant lenders or people with different kinds of products is generally a good thing. If that's also what has come out of Silicon Valley Bank sort of collapse and sort of maybe rebirth, and there's been a bunch of other models out there, I think it's still important that capital money flows. That's one of my themes for today, to the people who can do something with it and make the world a better place.
Yeah.
And so that's great. From a branding point of view, I'm not a branding expert. I'm like, oh, that brand's so tainted. Good luck with that. But like, hey, you want them to sponsor your event in San Francisco? Go check them out. They might be willing to do it.
You know, what I want to say to tie this discussion of Silicon Valley Bank with a bow and say, there is hope for those of us that crash and burn. There is hope
Always
and
hope.
opportunity to reinvent ourselves always. And that is what
Yes.
life is about.
Yes.
You
Yes.
can always reinvent yourself. You can always pick yourself back up after getting knocked down. Being resilient is the only way to truly thrive, right?
Yeah,
So you have to keep trying and keep
absolutely.
going. So thank
Yes.
you, SVB, for giving me some faith and optimism. Maybe Sam Bankman-Fried will
Oh
get
my
his
goodness.
second act. I don't know.
Generally, men get more second chances than women. Unfortunately,
Oh,
there's
what a
probably some research.
controversial thing for you to say, Karen.
Anyway, but maybe, I think learning from your mistakes is part of this too. And so if you can prove that you have learned and you are going to change your ways, then absolutely I'm all for second
Yeah.
chances.
All right. So that brings us to the end. Let's make it make sense. I have two big
Okay.
takeaways for our audience. One, the financial industry is ripe for disruption, but we're going to see that disruption really in the background, in our infrastructure, but we'll start to see those changes and improvements affecting our day to day. Behind the glorious startup tech heroes are many people committed to improving our financial systems,
Yep.
making them better,
Yep.
bringing them into the modern world. And the other point I want to leave make sense listeners with is that it's okay to continue to stand on the sideline with crypto as this technology continues to rebuild itself and its brand, particularly in the wake of the FTX trial. Sounds
Yep.
good?
Sounds good. And definitely, more openness, more consumer friendly regulation, so that we can own our data, we can take it with us, we can get better products. Like I'm absolutely all for that. I would love to see
On
that become
our
easier
way.
in this country. Maybe this, like, that was the one thing, like, didn't talk about this Consumer Protection Finance Bureau, like starting to open that door, like using a law from many years ago to do it. Like there's going to be a lot of resistance, I'm sure, from players who don't want to give up what they had.
We want to keep it simple, Kieran, and maybe I'll have you on again so we can
We
start
could talk
talking
about
about these other things. I
other
know
things.
so much to talk
So
about.
much to talk about.
Thank you for
Of course.
listening to Make Sense with me, your host, Lindsay Tabus, and guest, Kirin Kalia. We hope you enjoyed our take on the disruption our financial industry really needs. Karen, where can people find you online?
You can absolutely find me on LinkedIn. Kirin Kalia. There's only one of me as far as I know. Makes it pretty easy for me to find. So that's probably the best place. And always happy to have a conversation with somebody who wants to better use words to get what they want. That is
Yeah.
my whole thing. How can I help you?
Use your words well. As always, you can check out all the links and resources in the show notes. And final note, if you want to continue to be the smartest person in the room, make sure you're getting notified when each episode hits. So that means hitting subscribe on YouTube for next week's episode. And for audio only, you can follow really wherever you get your podcast. So thank you, Kieran, for joining me.
Thank you. It's been awesome.